They mocked her for being barren, until the alien princess chose the human mechanic as hers. The workshop hummed with the sound of welding torches and hydraulic lifts as Maya Rodriguez wiped grease from her hands, and she had spent another long shift repairing the transport ships that came through Station Arcturus, and nobody paid much attention to the quiet human mechanic who kept the fleet running. The Xanthir Empire controlled this sector of space, and their females were known across the galaxy for their beauty and power. And Princess Kalara was the most celebrated of them all, with her silver skin that shimmered like starlight, and eyes that held the depth of nebulas, and she had rejected every suitor presented to her for the past decade. What the Empire whispered about in hushed tones was the princess's curse, and she was barren and unable to produce heirs, and in a society where bloodlines meant everything. This made her worthless in the eyes of many, and the court ladies mocked her behind decorative fans, and the noble males looked past her. Despite her royal status, Kalara walked through the station corridors with her guards flanking her, and she had grown used to the pointing and whispers and her status as damaged. Goods followed her everywhere, and she was inspecting the human quarter today because the Empire needed these strange bipedal creatures for their mechanical expertise. Maya didn't look up when the royal procession entered her bay, and she was focused on the engine core in front of her, and her hands moved with practiced precision through the alien technology. And most humans found Xanthir systems confusing, but Maya understood them instinctively. The princess stopped and watched the human work, and something about the way Maya moved caught her attention, and there was no fear or hesitation and just pure confidence and competence, and Kalara found herself drawn closer. "You understand our systems better than our own engineers," and Kalara spoke, and her voice had the musical quality of her species. Maya finally looked up and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. And just makes sense once you see the patterns and your people build things to last. The guards tensed when Maya didn't bow or show proper deference, but Kalara raised a hand to stop them, and she studied the human with renewed interest, and Maya had scars on her arms from years of mechanical work, and her uniform was stained and worn, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that had nothing to do with bloodlines or titles. "What is your name?" and Kalara asked Maya. Rodriguez and the mechanic returned to her work as if dismissing royalty was perfectly normal. Over the following weeks, Kalara found reasons to visit the mechanical bays, and she would watch Maya work and ask questions about human culture. And Maya treated her like anyone else, and not a princess, and not a barren failure, and just another person. The court noticed the princess's frequent absences, and rumors began to spread, and Lady Sharina led the mockers, and she cornered Kalara in the garden one day. And so the barren princess seeks comfort among the primitives, and how fitting that one who cannot produce heirs associates with lesser beings. Kalara had endured such words for years, and they no longer cut as deeply as they once did, and she simply walked away. But Maya heard about the incident from a visiting trader, and something fierce burned in her chest, and she found the princess in her private quarters that evening, and they had grown comfortable in each other's presence. "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" and Maya asked without preamble. Kalara looked up from her datapad. "And what would you have me do? And they speak truth. And I am barren, and in our culture that makes me worthless." Maya crossed the room and sat beside her, "And that's garbage, and your worth isn't determined by your ability to have kids." The princess laughed bitterly. "And you do not understand our ways. I understand that you're brilliant and kind and capable, and those things matter more than biology." Kalara felt something shift in her chest, and no one had ever spoken to her this way. And the human saw her as a person, and not a vessel for heirs, and not a political pawn. In just her and Xanthir culture, there was an old custom and nearly forgotten in modern times, and a royal could claim a mate of their choosing regardless of status, if they passed 3 trials in strength and wisdom and heart, and Kalara had never considered using it before. And what was the point when she could produce no heirs anyway? But looking at Maya, she felt something she had thought long dead, and hope. The princess stood, and Maya Rodriguez, "I claim you as my chosen Maya," blinked, and what the guards who had been waiting outside rushed in, and "Princess, no," and one protested. "And she is human, and she is beneath your station." "I invoke the right of claiming," and Kalara announced, and her voice rang with royal authority. The court exploded, into chaos when news spread and a human and the Barren princess claiming a primitive, and it was scandal beyond measure. And Lady Serena laughed openly, and this will be entertaining, and watching the princess humiliate herself further. Maya stood before the assembled court, and Kalara had explained the trials, and strength could be physical or mental, and wisdom was demonstrated through problem-solving, and heart was the most abstract and the truest measure of character for the trial of strength. They brought forth their most complex engine, and one that had baffled their best engineers for months, and fixed this. And they commanded Maya rolled up her sleeves and studied the alien technology, and her fingers traced pathways and connections, and within 2 hours the engine hummed to life, and the court murmured in surprise. For the trial of wisdom, they presented an impossible diplomatic scenario and a trade dispute that had nearly caused war. And solved this, Maya listened to both sides and asked questions, and then proposed a solution so simple and so fair that both parties immediately agreed, and even the elders nodded in approval. For the trial of heart they did something cruel, and they brought forth a Xanthir child, and sick, and dying, and saved this child using your primitive human methods. Maya knelt beside the small being, and she had studied Xanthir biology during her time with Kalara, and she worked through the night and combined human medical knowledge with Xanthir healing techniques, and by dawn the child breathed easier, and by evening the fever broke. The court fell silent. Lady Serena stepped forward, and her face twisted with rage, and this proves nothing, and the princess is still barren, and this human cannot give. Her heirs. Maya stood and turned to face the assembly, and her voice carried across the hall. And you people are so focused on bloodlines and heirs that you can't see what's right in front of you. And Kalara is brilliant, and she's a better leader than anyone here, and if she can't have biological children, then we will adopt, and there are orphans across this empire who need homes and love and purpose. She moved to stand beside Kalara, and worth isn't measured in offspring, and it's measured in what you do, and who you help, and how you treat others. And Kalara has more worth than this entire court combined. The chamber erupted, and some in anger and some in shock, but the High Elder stood, and an ancient Xanthir who had seen centuries pass. And the human speaks truth, and she declared. And the old ways valued honor and capability over mere biology, and the trials are past. And the claim is valid. Kalara and Maya were bonded in a ceremony that blended both their cultures, and the princess wore human white while Maya donned traditional Xanthir silver. And they adopted their first child within a month, and an orphan from the outer colonies who had lost everything. In a pirate raid years later, the Empire would look back on this moment as a turning point, and Princess Kalara and her human mate revolutionized adoption practices across their worlds, and they proved that families could be built on love rather than blood. And Lady Serena faded into obscurity, while Maya and Kalara became legends in their private quarters at night. Kalara would sometimes trace the scars on Maya's hands, and the hands that had fixed engines and solved problems and saved a child. And thank you. And she would whisper. Maya would pull her close, and, for what? For seeing me when no one else could. The mechanic smiled, and I saw you because you're worth seeing and always have been. And in the darkness of space their love burned brighter than any star, and proving that worth was never about what you could produce and only about who you chose to be.